"Can I sit with you?" He'd already asked 7 tables. 7 polite refusals. A 72-year-old man with bruises around his wrists and a limp that turned every step into agony, rejected by every person in that diner. The last table belonged to a Hells Angels biker with fists like cinder blocks and eyes that missed nothing. What Cole Mercer saw when Harold Bennett sat down, the grip marks, the flinching, the way he ate like someone who expected the plate to be taken away, set something in motion that would expose a crime so calculated, so quiet, so perfectly disguised behind Christmas cookies and a grandson's smile that an entire town refused to believe it until the lock was cut off the door. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story to the very end. Comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches. Harold Bennett's hand was shaking when he pushed through the glass door of May's Diner. Not the kind of shaking that comes from cold weather. Not the kind that comes from age either. This was something else. This was the trembling of a man who hadn't been outside in a long time. A man who didn't know if he'd make it back before anyone noticed he was gone. The lunch rush had already thinned out. A few truckers, a couple of locals nursing iced tea, a woman with 2 kids in the corner booth, scrolling her phone while the younger one threw fries on the floor. Harold stood near the entrance for almost a full minute. Nobody looked up. He was 72 years old. Thinning gray hair that hadn't been cut properly in months. A flannel shirt buttoned wrong, one side hanging lower than the other. Khaki pants too loose at the waist, cinched with a belt that had run out of holes. And a limp. A deep, grinding limp on his left side that turned every step into a negotiation with pain. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They moved too fast, scanning the room, checking the door, scanning again, like a man who expected someone to walk in and drag him back. He spotted the first table. 2 men, mid-50s, baseball caps, plates half cleared. Harold limped over. He stopped about 3 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough not to crowd. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was quiet, careful, like he was testing whether it still worked. "Would it be all right if I sat with you?" The first man glanced at his buddy. The buddy didn't look up. "Sorry, pal, we're just finishing up." They weren't finishing up. Their coffee was still full. But Harold nodded like he understood, like he'd expected it. He moved to the next table. A woman alone, reading a paperback. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. Could I maybe sit here? I won't be any trouble." She smiled, the kind of smile people give when they've already decided no. "I'm actually waiting for someone, sorry." She wasn't waiting for anyone. Her purse was on the opposite seat, and she'd already settled her check. Harold nodded again. 3rd table, 4th, 5th. Each time, the same quiet request. Each time, a polite deflection. Nobody was cruel about it. Nobody raised their voice or told him to get lost. They just didn't want to be involved. Didn't want to sit across from an old man who looked like trouble had followed him through the door. By the 6th table, Harold's limp had gotten worse. He was gripping the back of each chair now, just to stay upright. His left knee buckled slightly every other step, and he caught himself on the edge of a table hard enough to rattle the salt shaker. The 7th table said no before he even opened his mouth. "Sorry, buddy, full up." There was 1 chair, and 1 person sitting there. Harold stood in the middle of May's Diner and looked around. The room felt enormous. Every table occupied by people who'd already decided he wasn't their problem. Except one, the last table, back corner. Tucked against the wall where the overhead light had burned out months ago, and nobody had bothered to replace it. A man sat alone, broad shoulders, mid-40s, sunburned skin that said he'd been riding for days, dark blonde hair pulled back and tied off, a jawline that looked like it had been set wrong after a fight and never corrected, arms that stretched the sleeves of a plain black t-shirt, and over that a worn leather vest. The back patch was visible even from across the room. Hells Angels. The rocker underneath read Arizona. Harold stared at that patch for a long time. Every instinct in his body told him to turn around, to limp back out the door and figure something else out. A man like that, a man wearing that patch, wasn't someone you approached. Not if you had any sense. Not if you'd lived 72 years learning when to keep your head down. But Harold was out of tables, and he was out of time. He crossed the diner floor, each step louder than the last. Not because he was trying to be heard, but because his limp turned every footfall into a small collision with the ground. The biker didn't look up when Harold stopped at his table. He was holding a coffee mug, black, no sugar, and staring at something on the far wall that probably wasn't there. His name was Cole Mercer, and Cole had learned a long time ago that you could tell more about a person by the way they approached you than by anything they actually said. He'd heard the old man's circuit around the room, every polite refusal, every shuffled step between tables. He tracked it the way he tracked everything, without turning his head, without changing his expression, without giving anyone a reason to think he was paying attention. Cole had been riding with the club for 23 years, vice president of the Flagstaff chapter. He'd buried friends. He'd sat in rooms where the wrong word got a man hurt. He'd stared down federal agents across interview tables and given them nothing but silence. But he'd also sat with dying men in hospital rooms. He'd held a brother's kid during a funeral because nobody else would. He'd pulled over on a highway outside Tucson once because he saw a woman trying to change a tire in 112-degree heat with a baby in the back seat. The world saw the patch. Cole saw what was underneath it. And right now, underneath the trembling and the bad limp and the shirt buttoned wrong, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Fear. Raw, animal fear. The kind that doesn't come from being startled. The kind that builds over weeks, months. The kind that rewires a person until they can't eat without checking over their shoulder. Harold cleared his throat. "Can I sit with you?" Cole looked at him, not through him, not past him, at him. He studied the old man's face for exactly 3 seconds. Then he did something that made the entire diner go quiet. He stood up, not fast, not aggressive, slow and deliberate. He reached across the table, pulled the empty chair back, and angled it so Harold wouldn't have to twist his bad leg to sit down. "Sit," Cole said. One word, no warmth in it, no hostility either, just a statement of fact. Harold sat, and for the first time in what looked like months, his shoulders dropped half an inch. The waitress came over, young girl, maybe 22, blonde ponytail, already nervous about approaching Cole's table. She set a menu in front of Harold. "What can I get you, sir?" Harold opened the menu and stared at it like he'd forgotten how to read. His fingers trembled on the laminated edges. Just some toast, please. And water." Cole watched him. "Get him eggs, too," Cole said without looking at the waitress. "Scrambled, and bacon, and more coffee." Harold looked up. "Oh, I can't. I don't have much on me." "I didn't ask." The waitress disappeared. Harold sat there with his hands in his lap, fingers interlocked, thumbs pressing against each other like he was trying to hold himself together from the inside out. "Thank you," he whispered. Cole said nothing. The food came. Harold ate like a man who'd been rationing, small bites, chewing slowly, swallowing carefully. Not the way someone eats when they're hungry, the way someone eats when they're not sure the food won't be taken away. Cole had seen that before. In men coming out of county, in people leaving situations they didn't have names for yet. He let Harold eat in silence. Didn't push, didn't ask questions, just sat there with his coffee and let the old man have a meal in peace. It was Harold who spoke first. "I shouldn't be here." Cole set his mug down. "Why's that?" "My grandson says I'm not safe to be on my own. Says I get confused, wander off." Harold paused. His jaw tightened. "He tells people I don't know where I am half the time." Cole listened. His eyes dropped to Harold's wrists. There it was, yellow bruising, circular, around both wrists but worse on the left. The kind of bruising that comes from being grabbed, held, restrained, not a fall, not an accident, not the normal wear of a 72-year-old body breaking down. Grip marks. Cole had seen those before too. "You get confused a lot?" Cole asked. His voice was flat, casual, but his eyes weren't casual at all. Harold looked at him, and for the first time something shifted behind those eyes. A flicker of clarity so sharp it cut through every polite excuse he'd been trained to give. I worked 31 years as a civil engineer, Harold said. I can still calculate load-bearing tolerances in my head. I finished the crossword in the Flagstaff paper this morning in 11 minutes. I know exactly where I am, what day it is, and what I had for dinner 3 nights ago, which was half a can of soup because that's what was left. He paused. I'm not confused. He tells people I'm confused. There's a difference. The air between them changed. Cole felt it. That shift that happens when someone stops performing and starts telling the truth. When the weight of a lie they've been forced to carry gets too heavy and they set it down on the table between 2 cups of coffee and hope the other person doesn't walk away. Who's he? Cole asked. My grandson, Ryan. Ryan got a last name? Caldwell. Ryan Caldwell. Cole filed it. Where do you live, Harold? Harold hesitated. The fear came back. It moved across his face like a shadow passing over open ground. With Ryan, he moved into my house 2 years ago, after my wife passed, said he wanted to help, said I shouldn't be alone. That what happened? That's what he told people. Cole leaned back. He didn't cross his arms, didn't close off. He kept his posture open, kept his eyes steady. Tell me what really happened. Harold looked toward the door again, that quick, involuntary check. The one Cole had clocked the moment the old man walked in. At first it was fine. He was good company, helped around the house, took me to appointments. Then about 6 months in, things changed. He started handling my bills, said I was forgetting to pay them. I wasn't forgetting. I'd been paying my own bills since 1974. Harold's voice dropped. Then he took my phone, said I was making calls that confused people. Calling the same number twice, that kind of thing. I wasn't. Cole's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Then the car keys. Then my ID. Then he started telling my neighbors I was having episodes. Told my church I was declining. Told the bank I needed help managing my accounts. Harold looked down at his empty plate. And then one day I realized I hadn't left the property in 5 weeks, and the back door had a new lock on it. A beat of silence. From the outside, Harold added. Cole's hand tightened around his coffee mug. Not a dramatic gesture, not a display. His knuckles whitened, and that was it. But beneath the table, his right boot pressed flat against the floor, in the way it did when he was anchoring himself against a rising tide of something that didn't have a polite name. How'd you get here today? Cole asked. He left for work at 7. He thinks the lock's enough. But I've been working on the latch for 2 weeks with a butter knife. Got it open this morning. Harold's hands were still shaking, but his voice wasn't. His voice was the steadiest thing about him. I walked 1.5 miles to the highway. A truck driver gave me a ride to the diner. Cole exhaled slowly. Anyone else know? Family? Friends? There's nobody. My wife is gone. My daughter, Ryan's mother, died in 2009. Car accident. Ryan's the only family I have left. Something about the way he said it, the only family I have left, carried a weight that went beyond fact. It carried the particular grief of someone who'd been betrayed by the last person on earth they trusted. I tried to tell someone, Harold continued, 3 months ago, at the bank. I told the teller something wasn't right. She looked nervous, said she'd note it. Nothing happened. What about the police? Harold almost laughed. Not a real laugh, the kind that sounds like something breaking. Ryan volunteers with the Sheriff's Auxiliary. He coaches Little League. He brings cookies to the neighbors at Christmas. You know what people see when they look at him? Cole knew. They see a good grandson taking care of his grandfather. Exactly. Harold's eyes were wet now, not crying, just full. And you know what they see when they look at me? Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. They see a confused old man who doesn't know what's real anymore. The diner kept moving around them, plates clinking, the cook calling orders, the bell above the door jingling as someone walked in. But at that table, in that corner, time had folded in on itself. There was only the truth between them, raw and unfinished. Harold reached into his coat pocket. His fingers fumbled. Something small and metallic slipped out and hit the table with a faint ping. A brass key, old, worn, attached to a paper tag. The tag read, Unit 42, Mesa Ridge Storage. Harold looked at it, then at Cole, then back at the key. I rented that unit 8 months ago, Harold said. Paid cash. Ryan doesn't know about it. What's in it? Harold didn't answer right away. He picked up the key and held it in his palm like he was weighing it. Everything he doesn't want anyone to see. Cole stared at the key. If something happens to me, Harold said, and his voice cracked for the first time, somebody needs to know that unit exists. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that. Cole looked at him, really looked at him. No, he said quietly, I don't. Harold slid the key across the table. Cole didn't pick it up. Not yet. He left it sitting there on the formica between his coffee mug and Harold's empty plate. Why me? Cole asked. You got 7 other tables full of folks who look a lot more approachable than I do. Harold glanced at the patch on Cole's vest, then back at his face. Because they all said no, and because a man who pulls out a chair for a stranger isn't the man most people think he is. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not friendship, something older and quieter than that. Recognition. The understanding that sometimes the person you'd least expect is the only one willing to see what everyone else refuses to look at. Cole picked up the key. He held it between his thumb and index finger, turned it once, then slid it into the inside pocket of his vest. I'm going to ask you something, Cole said, and I need you to answer me straight. Harold nodded. Are you afraid of him? Harold's mouth opened, closed. His hands went back to his lap, the thumbs pressed together again. I'm afraid of what he'll do when he realizes I'm not going to give up. When he figures out I'm still thinking clearly. When he understands I've been keeping records. Records? A notebook. It's in the storage unit. Everything he's done. Dates, amounts, what he said, what he did, when the locks went on, when the food got cut, everything. Cole's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A gear turning, a decision forming in the place where decisions live. Not in the head, but somewhere lower, somewhere older. Harold, yes? You need to go back. Harold flinched, the fear surged. Not because you belong there, Cole said quickly, because if you don't, he'll know something's changed. And right now, the only advantage you have is that he thinks you're broken. Harold understood. It was written all over his face. The grim, exhausted understanding of a man who knew he had to walk back into the cage and pretend the door was still locked. How long? Harold whispered. Few days, maybe a week. Can you do that? Harold looked at the empty plate, the clean fork, the glass of water with the ice half melted. I've been doing it for 2 years, he said. I can do it a little longer. He stood up, slowly. The limp was worse now, the walk and the stress catching up with his body. Cole stood too. Harold, the old man turned. You did the right thing walking in here today. Harold's eyes were glassy. His lip trembled once, then steadied. I almost didn't. But you did. Harold nodded. Once. Then he turned and limped toward the door. Each step deliberate. Each step carrying the weight of everything he'd said and everything he hadn't. The brass key was gone from the table. The bell above the door jingled as Harold pushed through. The afternoon light caught him for a moment. Thin frame, bad leg, flannel shirt buttoned wrong, and then the door swung shut, and he was gone. Cole sat back down. He reached into his vest pocket and felt the key. Small, cold, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with metal. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a short list of contacts, stopped on a name, pressed call. 2 rings. Yeah? Dex, it's Cole. I know it's Cole. What do you need? I need you and Roach at the shop tonight, 9 o'clock. Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that meant Dex was reading the tone. This club business? No. Then what? Cole looked at the door where Harold had disappeared. Something worse. He hung up. The waitress came back, refilled his coffee, looked at the empty chair across from him. "Your friend okay?" she asked. Cole didn't answer right away. He stared at the chair Harold had been sitting in, the chair he'd pulled out for a stranger, a simple gesture that had just cracked open something that wasn't going to close. "No," Cole said. "He's not." He picked up the mug, took a long drink, set it down. Then he sat in the silence and let the weight of what he just heard settle into his bones. Because Cole Mercer knew, the way men who've lived in the margins know, that what Harold Bennett had just described wasn't a family problem. It was a crime. And the man committing it had built himself the perfect disguise. A smile, a handshake, a plate of Christmas cookies, and a lock on the outside of a door. Cole pulled into the back lot of Mercer's Custom Cycles at 10 minutes to 9, cut the engine, sat on the bike for a long moment with his hands still on the throttle, feeling the heat bleed off the pipes. He hadn't stopped thinking about Harold since the diner. Not about what Harold said, about what Harold didn't say. The pauses. The way his hands went to his lap every time the fear got too close. The way he ate that toast like a man who'd trained himself to eat small and eat quiet. Those weren't things you faked. Those were things that got carved into a person over time, layer by layer, until the behavior became invisible, even to the person doing it. Cole reached into his vest pocket, felt the key, still there. He went inside. Dex was already at the back table. Big man, 6'3", shaved head, tattoo sleeves running from his wrists to the base of his neck. 41 years old, but his eyes were older. He'd done a 5-year stint at Florence for aggravated assault when he was 26. Hit a man who was beating a woman at a gas station. Hit him once. The man didn't get up for 3 days. Dex did the time without complaint because in his mind, the math worked out. Roach sat across from him, smaller, wiry, early 50s, gray creeping into a dark beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. Real name was David Roachford, but nobody had called him David since the Reagan administration. Roach was the quiet one, the one who could sit in a room for 2 hours without speaking, and then say the one thing nobody else was willing to say. He'd been riding with the club longer than Cole, 27 years. He'd seen everything. Cole dropped the brass key on the table between them. "What's this?" Dex asked. "Storage unit, Mesa Ridge, Unit 42. Roach picked up the key, turned it over, read the tag, set it back down. "Whose?" "Old man named Harold Bennett, 72, lives with his grandson out past Mountain Air, or he used to live with him. Now I'm not sure what to call it." Cole sat down. He didn't ease into it. He told them what Harold told him, all of it. The locks, the food, the phone, the bank accounts, the fabricated confusion, the isolation, the bruises on the wrists. When he finished, the room was quiet. Dex spoke first. "You believe him?" "Every word." "How do you know he's not—" "Don't." Cole's voice dropped flat. "Don't say what you're about to say. I sat across from that man for 45 minutes. His mind is sharper than yours on your best day. He recited dates, amounts, names. He knew exactly what was happening to him, and he knew nobody would believe it." Dex held up both hands. "I'm not doubting you. I'm asking what a lawyer would ask." A lawyer's going to ask why a 72-year-old man had to beg 7 strangers for a seat at a diner before someone would look at him. That's what a lawyer's going to ask. Roach hadn't spoken yet. He was staring at the key. "The grandson," Roach said. "What do we know?" "Ryan Caldwell, 34, moved in 2 years ago after the wife died, told everyone he was helping out, started running the finances, the medical decisions, everything. Volunteers with the Sheriff's Auxiliary, coaches Little League." Roach nodded slowly. "So he's got the town on his side. He's got everyone on his side. That's the whole point. He built himself into the good grandson, the one who sacrificed his life to take care of Grandpa. And Harold? Harold's the old man losing his mind. That's the story Ryan's been telling for 2 years, and nobody's questioned it because it's easier to believe the old man's confused than to believe the grandson's a predator." Dex leaned forward. "What's in the storage unit?" "Don't know yet. Harold said it's everything Ryan doesn't want seen. Bank records, documents, a notebook. A notebook? Harold's been keeping notes, dates, amounts, what was done, what was said. He told me he started writing it down 8 months ago when he realized nobody was going to help him. Roach stood up. He didn't announce it, didn't make a speech, just stood, took the key off the table, and put it in his pocket. When? He asked. Now. They took Roach's truck. No bikes, no patches. 3 men in a pickup driving through Flagstaff on a Tuesday night, looking like any other crew heading home from a late shift. Mesa Ridge Storage was off the interstate, past the railroad tracks, tucked behind a tire shop that had closed 6 years ago. One security camera at the gate, but it pointed at the entrance, not the units. Roach drove past once, came back around, pulled into the lot. Unit 42 was on the second row, middle of the line. Cole got out. The key fit clean. The lock turned without resistance. He rolled the door up. The unit was small, 8 by 10 maybe. No furniture, no boxes stacked to the ceiling, just a folding table against the back wall and a cardboard file box sitting on top of it. Cole pulled the box out. Inside, bank statements, 12 months worth, highlighted in yellow. Withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, 12,000 in a single transaction dated 4 months ago, all from Harold's accounts. All signed in handwriting that didn't match Harold's. Beneath the statements, an insurance policy. Life insurance taken out 18 months ago. Beneficiary changed 3 months later. Original beneficiary, a local church. New beneficiary, Ryan James Caldwell. The payout was $450,000. Beneath the policy, medical records, Harold's name, Harold's social. But the notes inside weren't Harold's reality. Cognitive decline, moderate to severe. Episodes of confusion and disorientation. Recommendation for full-time supervised care. Signed by a Dr. Elaine Prescott. Dex read over Cole's shoulder. He's got a doctor in on it? Maybe, maybe not. Ryan could have brought Harold in on a bad day, coached him beforehand, told the doctor what to look for. You feed someone a story before they walk in, and they're already seeing symptoms before the patient opens his mouth. At the bottom of the box, under everything else, was the notebook. Thin, spiral-bound, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store. The cover was worn soft. The pages inside were filled with handwriting. Small, tight, shaky in places but legible. Every entry dated. Cole opened to the first page. If anything happens to me, this is why. He read the first entry aloud. March 14th. Ryan took my checkbook today, said I wrote a check to someone I don't know. I didn't. I know every check I've written this year. He raised his voice when I argued. First time he grabbed my arm. Dex's face changed. Not anger, something past anger, something cold. Cole kept reading. April 2nd. Haven't left the house in 3 weeks. Ryan told Mrs. Patterson next door that I had a bad spell, and it's better if people don't visit for a while. Mrs. Patterson brought a casserole. Ryan took it at the door. I didn't get any. May 19th. Found out today he changed the insurance. I wasn't supposed to see the paperwork. It was in the kitchen trash under coffee grounds. I pulled it out after he went to bed. He's the beneficiary now. He changed it 3 months ago. June 7th. The lock is on the back door now. He said it's for my safety. He said I tried to walk into traffic. I didn't. I was standing on the porch. I haven't been near the road in 2 months. Page after page, entry after entry. Each one a small, precise record of a man watching his own life get dismantled by the person closest to him. No hysteria, no melodrama, just facts, written by a hand that trembled, but a mind that didn't. Cole closed the notebook. He stood there for a long time, holding it. This is evidence, Roach said. I know. This goes to the police, and it's over for Ryan Caldwell. Maybe. Maybe? Cole looked at him. Ryan volunteers with the sheriff's office. You want to hand this to the same people who see him every week at community events? Who coach with him? who've been hearing for 2 years that Harold Bennett is losing his mind? Roach didn't answer. If we hand this over and they bury it, or warn Ryan, Harold's got nothing, worse than nothing. He's got a grandson who knows the evidence is out there, and an old man who can't run. Dex cracked his knuckles. Not a threat, a habit, something he did when he was thinking. So what do? We verify everything in this box, every statement, every date, every claim Harold made. We build the case so airtight that when it does go to law enforcement, there's no room to look the other way. We're not cops, Cole. No, we're not. And that's exactly why this might work. They locked the unit, put everything back except the notebook. Cole kept that, slid it inside his vest next to the key. On the drive back, nobody spoke for 6 miles. Then Dex said, "The doctor, the one who signed those records." "Prescott, yeah." "She local?" "Flagstaff Medical Associates. I saw the letterhead." "Someone should talk to her." "Someone will." Cole spent the next 2 days doing something he hadn't done since he was 20 years old and learning how the world actually worked. He made phone calls. Not the kind that involved favors or pressure, quiet calls, to people who knew people. A woman at the county recorder's office who owed nothing to anyone but had a conscience. A retired postal worker who'd been delivering mail to Harold's address for 15 years and noticed the change. A bartender at a VFW hall who said Harold used to come in every Thursday for the quiz night until one day he just stopped. Each conversation added a piece. The postal worker, a man named Glenn, told Cole that mail deliveries had changed at the Bennett house. "Used to be Harold would meet me at the box, every day. We'd talk for a minute. Phillies scores, weather, nothing big. Then about a year and a half ago, the grandson started collecting the mail. Told me Harold wasn't up for it anymore. I asked if Harold was okay. The kid smiled and said he was fine, just tired. But I noticed something." "What?" "The mailbox lock got changed, and Harold's name came off it." Cole called the church Harold had originally listed as his insurance beneficiary, spoke with a Pastor Williams who remembered Harold well. Harold and June, his wife, they were in the third pew every Sunday for 20 years. After June passed, Harold kept coming for about 6 months. Then the grandson started calling. Said Harold wasn't feeling well. Said he'd bring him when he was up to it. We sent cards. We sent volunteers. They were always turned away at the door. By who? By Ryan. Always Ryan. He was very polite about it, very convincing. He told our outreach coordinator that Harold sometimes didn't recognize people and it upset him. So we stopped sending anyone. Did you believe it? The pastor was quiet for a beat. I wanted to. It's easier to believe someone's being cared for than to believe the alternative. I'll carry that a long time. Cole found the bank teller too. Her name was Sophia Reyes, 28 years old, 2 years at First National, and she'd been the one Harold tried to tell. She met Cole at a coffee shop on the east side. She was nervous, kept looking around. I remember him, she said. He came in with the grandson. Ryan had power of attorney paperwork. Everything looked right on the surface. Harold signed where he was told to sign. But when Ryan stepped away to use the restroom, Harold leaned across the counter and said, "This isn't right. He's taking it all." What did you do? Sophia looked at her hands. I flagged the account for review, left a note for my manager, and nothing happened. Nothing? My manager said the POA was valid, said Harold had documented cognitive decline, said there was nothing we could do unless there was a court order. So you let it go? No, her voice got sharp. I didn't let it go. I called Adult Protective Services. Anonymous tip. 2 weeks later, a caseworker went to the house. Cole sat up. What happened? Ryan answered the door, invited her in, showed her the house, showed her Harold's room. Harold was clean, dressed, sitting in a chair watching television. The caseworker talked to him for 20 minutes. Ryan was in the room the whole time. And? Harold said he was fine, said everything was fine, said Ryan was doing a wonderful job. He lied. He was terrified. I could see it in the report. The caseworker noted that Harold seemed anxious but oriented. She closed the case. Sophia's eyes were wet. She blinked hard. "I think about him every day," she said. "Every single day. I think about that moment when he leaned across the counter and I was the one person who could have done something, and the system did exactly what it always does." "What's that?" It believed the younger voice. That sentence hit Cole like a fist to the chest. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. In every system, legal, medical, social, there was an unspoken hierarchy of credibility. And a 72-year-old man with an alleged cognitive decline sat at the bottom of it. Ryan Caldwell hadn't just isolated Harold, he'd engineered it so that even when Harold screamed for help, the scream sounded like confusion. That was the genius of it. And that was the evil. Cole went back to the shop that night, laid everything out on the table: the bank statements, the insurance documents, the medical records, the notebook, his notes from every conversation. Dex and Roach sat across from him. "There's enough here," Roach said. "There's enough for us," Cole corrected. "There's not enough for a system that already decided Harold doesn't know what he's talking about." Then what's the play? Cole had been thinking about this since the diner, since Harold limped out the door and left a brass key on a Formica table, since Cole picked it up and made a choice he couldn't unmake. "We need the house," Cole said. Dex frowned. "Meaning what?" "Meaning someone needs to see where Harold's actually living. Not the front room Ryan shows the caseworkers. The real space, the one with a lock on the outside." "How?" "Ryan works 8 to 5 at a property management company in town. Harold said he leaves at 7. If Harold can get the latch open again..." "You want to go in?" "I want to see it." Roach shook his head. "That's trespassing. Roach, there's a 72-year-old man locked in a shed behind his own house. I don't care what it's called." Nobody argued. The next morning, Cole drove past the Bennett address. Quiet street, modest houses, fenced yards. Ryan's car, a gray Honda Accord, clean, nothing out of place, was already gone. It was 7:40. Cole parked 2 streets over. Walked. No vest, no patches. Just a man in jeans and a work jacket, carrying nothing. He went to the back fence. The gate was latched but not locked. He opened it, and then he saw it. The shed, converted from what had probably been a garden storage unit. A small window, sealed with plywood from the outside. A door with a padlock hanging open. Harold had gotten the latch again. Cole stepped inside. A cot, a thin blanket, a bucket in the corner, a space heater that looked like it hadn't worked in months, a shelf with 4 cans of soup and a sleeve of crackers. No phone, no radio, no television, no books, nothing. On the wall, scratched into the drywall was something sharp, a nail maybe, were 4 words: "I am still here." Cole stood in that shed for less than 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes burned themselves into a place he'd never be able to reach. He'd seen violence. He'd lived in it. He'd been on both sides of it. But this quiet, methodical dismantling of a human being, this was something else. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a crime of patience. He pulled out his phone, took photographs. The cot, the bucket, the sealed window, the padlock, the shelf, the scratched words on the wall. Every angle, every detail. Then he left, closed the gate, walked back to his truck, sat behind the wheel and didn't start the engine for a long time. His phone buzzed, a text from Dex. "How bad?" Cole typed back 3 words. "Worse than we thought." He started the engine. He drove straight to Roach's place, walked in without knocking, found Roach at the kitchen table, cleaning a carburetor. Cole put his phone on the table and scrolled through the photos. Roach looked at each one. His hands stopped moving. The rag went still. When he got to the last photo, the words scratched into the wall, his jaw clenched so hard, Cole heard his teeth grind. "I am still here," Roach read. He set the phone down. "I've got a cousin," Roach said, "works for the county prosecutor's office in Coconino. Not a lawyer, paralegal, but she knows who to talk to and who to trust. Call her." Right now? Right now. Roach picked up his phone, walked to the other room. Cole heard the murmur of conversation, couldn't make out the words, didn't need to. He knew the tone, the same tone he'd used when he called Dex 2 nights ago. The tone that said this isn't a question anymore. Roach came back. She wants to see everything, notebook, statements, photos, all of it. She says if this is what we're saying it is, it doesn't go through the local sheriff. It goes to the county attorney directly. When? She can meet us tomorrow, 6 a.m., before the office opens. Cole nodded. Something had shifted. The key Harold slid across a diner table had turned into bank records, medical fraud, sealed windows, and a padlock. Every quiet piece of evidence was stacking into something that couldn't be ignored. And somewhere on a quiet street in Mountain Air, Harold Bennett was sitting in a shed, scratching words into a wall, keeping himself alive one sentence at a time, waiting, not knowing if anyone had heard him, not knowing if the man in the worn leather vest had kept his word. But he'd asked the question, and Cole Mercer had answered it with a chair. Roach's cousin was a woman named Lena Castillo, 44 years old, 14 years at the Coconino County Prosecutor's Office, and she had the kind of face that gave away nothing until she decided it should. She'd seen drug cases collapse because someone filed wrong. She'd watched domestic violence charges get dropped because a victim recanted on the stand. She knew exactly how the system worked, and more importantly, she knew exactly where it failed. She met them at 6 in the morning at a storage unit rental office that didn't open until 8. Roach had a key to the side door because he rented space there for motorcycle parts. They used the back office, folding table, plastic chairs, fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying insect. Cole put everything on the table, bank statements, insurance documents, medical records, the photographs on his phone, and the notebook. Lena didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. She went through every piece of paper, every photograph, every page of the notebook. She read Harold's entries the way a surgeon reads an x-ray, not for emotion but for fractures. When she finished, she closed the notebook and placed both hands flat on the table. How did you get the photographs of the shed? I walked in. Through a locked gate? The gate wasn't locked. The shed wasn't locked either. Harold popped the latch. Did Harold invite you onto the property? Cole hesitated. Not explicitly. That's a problem. The man is being held prisoner in his own backyard. That's a bigger problem. Lena didn't flinch. I'm not arguing morality. I'm arguing admissibility. If this goes to trial and a defense attorney finds out a Hells Angels member entered the property without permission and photographed the interior of a structure, those photos get thrown out. And if the photos get thrown out, the jury never sees the shed. The room went quiet. Dex shifted in his chair. So the pictures are useless? I didn't say that. I said they're inadmissible in their current form. But there's a difference between what a jury sees and what a judge sees when signing a warrant. If I can get the right person in the county attorney's office to look at this, not the photos, but the financial records, the insurance change, the notebook, that's enough for a welfare check. A real one. Not the kind where a caseworker walks in and takes Ryan's word for it. APS already did a welfare check, Cole said, 9 months ago. Harold told the caseworker everything was fine because Ryan was standing right there. I know how that works. And that's exactly why the second one has to be different. If a judge signs off on a welfare check based on credible evidence of financial exploitation and unlawful confinement, law enforcement goes in, not a social worker. They go in with authority to search. And they go in without giving Ryan 48 hours notice to clean up. Cole leaned forward. How fast? If I walk this into the county attorney's office this morning and it lands on the right desk, we could have a judge's order by end of week. End of week? Harold's sitting in that shed right now. I understand that, but if we rush this and Ryan gets tipped off, if he moves Harold, destroys evidence, or lawyers up before we're ready, we lose everything. Harold ends up right back where he started, except now Ryan knows people are watching. Cole's hands pressed flat against the table, mirroring Lena's posture without realizing it. His jaw worked back and forth. Every instinct in him said move. Move now. Go to that house, pull Harold out, and let the legal system catch up when it felt like it. But he'd been alive long enough to know that instinct and strategy weren't always the same thing. "What do you need from us?" he asked. "Nothing else. You've done the hard part. The notebook alone is devastating. It's a contemporaneous record written by a competent individual documenting ongoing abuse. The bank statements corroborate the financial claims. The insurance change establishes motive. And the medical records give us a thread to pull with Dr. Prescott." "You think the doctor's involved?" Lena chose her words carefully. "I think a doctor who diagnoses moderate to severe cognitive decline in a man who can keep a detailed written journal for 8 months is either negligent or compromised. Either way, it's worth a conversation." She gathered the documents, organized them into a folder she'd brought, labeled it with a case number she assigned herself, something she technically didn't have the authority to do, but Lena Castillo had long ago decided that procedure was a tool, not a cage. "One more thing," she said at the door. "Stay away from the house. Stay away from Ryan. And for God's sake, don't go near Harold until this is in motion. If Ryan sees a Hells Angels member anywhere near his grandfather, the narrative writes itself." Cole didn't like it. His face said so, but he nodded. Lena left. Dex looked at Cole. "You trust her?" "Roach trusts her. That's enough. And if the county attorney sits on it, then we do it a different way." The first day was the hardest. Cole went about his business at the shop, rebuilt a transmission, took a phone call about a parts order, ate lunch at his workbench. Normal things. The kind of things that felt grotesque when he knew what was happening 15 miles away on a quiet street in Mountain Air. He kept seeing the shed, the cot, the bucket, the 4 cans of soup. Those words scratched into the drywall. "I am still here." He'd known men who'd done time in solitary, hard men who'd earned their sentences, and even they came out changed, diminished, hollowed out by the silence and the smallness and the waiting. Harold was 72 years old, locked in a garden shed by his own grandson, and he was still writing in a notebook, still keeping records, still scratching his existence into the wall like a man carving his name into a tree so someone would know he'd been there. That wasn't confusion. That was defiance. The second day, Cole's phone rang. Lena. The county attorney looked at it, and he called it one of the clearest cases of elder exploitation he's seen in 12 years. His words. Cole exhaled. "He's requesting an emergency welfare check with law enforcement present. Judge Morales is reviewing the petition this afternoon." "Today?" "Today. But Cole, there's a complication." His gut tightened. "What kind?" "Dr. Prescott. We pulled her filing history. She signed cognitive decline assessments for 4 other elderly patients in the last 3 years, all in Ryan's general area, all with family members managing their finances." The silence on the line stretched for 5 full seconds. "She's not negligent," Cole said. "No, she's not negligent." "How many of those patients are still alive?" Lena paused. 3. One died 11 months ago. Natural causes, according to the death certificate. But the family member who was managing his finances filed an insurance claim within 72 hours. Cole closed his eyes. "This isn't just Ryan," he said. "We don't know that yet. It could be coincidence. It could be a pattern." But the county attorney flagged it, and he's looping in the state attorney general's office as a precaution. What does that mean for Harold? It means the welfare check happens regardless. That's Harold's lifeline, and it's not changing. But if this is bigger than one grandson and one old man, the investigation expands. And expanded investigations take time. Harold doesn't have time. Harold has until Friday. That's when the judge signs the order. Can you get word to him? Tell him to sit tight 2 more days? He doesn't have a phone. Then you'll have to figure it out. She hung up. Cole stood in his shop with grease on his hands and a phone in his pocket and a question he couldn't answer. How do you tell a man locked in a shed that help is coming when the people holding the keys won't let you near the door? He called Glenn, the retired postal worker. Glenn, it's Cole Mercer. I remember, the man asking about Harold. I need a favor, and I need you to not ask why. Glenn was quiet. Then, what kind of favor? Harold's address. You still walk that route sometimes? Sometimes, old habits. Tomorrow morning, can you walk past the house? If Harold's outside, if he got the latch open again, I need you to tell him 3 words. What 3 words? Friday. Stay ready. Glenn didn't ask why. He didn't ask what it meant. 15 years of delivering mail to Harold Bennett had built something that didn't require explanation. I'll walk the route at 7:30, Glenn said. If he's out, I'll tell him. And if he's not, then I'll try again Thursday. Wednesday came and went. No word from Glenn. Cole worked at the shop, rebuilt a carburetor, stared at his phone, rebuilt another carburetor, stared at his phone again. Dex came by at 4, didn't say much, brought sandwiches. They ate in silence, which was fine because silence between men who trust each other doesn't need to be filled. At 6:15, Glenn called. I saw him. Cole gripped the phone. Where? In the backyard. He was sitting on the step outside the shed. The door was open. He saw me at the fence and he stood up. I said what you told me to say. Friday, stay ready. That's what I told him. What did he do? Glenn's voice got thick. He closed his eyes, and he nodded, and he said, tell him thank you. Cole couldn't speak for a moment. His throat had closed around something he didn't have a name for. Glenn, yeah? Thank you. Don't thank me. I should have done this a long time ago. Thursday was worse. The waiting had a weight to it, like carrying something you couldn't set down. Cole kept running scenarios. What if Ryan came home early on Friday? What if Harold couldn't get the latch open? What if the judge delayed the order? What if Ryan had a camera Cole hadn't seen? He pulled up Ryan Caldwell's social media. The accounts were public, which told Cole everything about the kind of man Ryan was. A man who wanted to be seen. Facebook, photos of Ryan at a charity barbecue, smiling with the sheriff. Instagram, Ryan at the ball field, arm around a kid in a batting helmet. LinkedIn, Ryan Caldwell, property manager, Flagstaff Realty Solutions, dedicated to community. Every image curated, every post a press release for a life that didn't exist. Cole scrolled deeper, found something from 6 months ago, a post Ryan had written. Taking care of Grandpa isn't easy, but family comes first. Some days are harder than others, but love doesn't quit. 412 likes, 67 comments, every single one praising Ryan for his sacrifice. Cole put the phone down. He thought about Harold eating half a can of soup in a shed with no heat. He thought about 412 people pressing a button that made them feel good and then scrolling past without a second thought. He thought about how easy it was to build a cage when the bars were made of other people's assumptions. Thursday night, Lena called. Signed. Judge Morales reviewed the petition and signed the order at 4:18 this afternoon. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Coconino County Sheriff's Office is executing the check. 2 deputies, 1 APS caseworker, and a victim's advocate from the county attorney's office. Not local deputies? Not the ones Ryan volunteers with? No, the county attorney specifically requested deputies from the Sedona substation. No connection to Ryan, no relationship, no bias. Cole breathed. Cole, listen to me. Whatever happens tomorrow, you cannot be there. Not on the street, not in the neighborhood, nowhere near that house. If Ryan's attorney finds out you were involved, if your name comes up in any context, it gives the defense a narrative. Biker intimidation, coercion, conspiracy, you understand? I understand. Do you, though? I said I understand, Lena. Good, because Harold Bennett's freedom depends on this going clean. No shortcuts, no cowboy moves, just the evidence and the law. He hung up. He sat in his shop alone. The fluorescent lights hummed. A clock on the wall ticked past 9, then 10, then 11. He pulled out the notebook, Harold's notebook. He'd kept it against Lena's instructions to hand over everything. He'd made copies of every page and given those to Lena, but the original, Harold's handwriting, Harold's words, Harold's proof of existence, he kept. He opened it to the last entry, dated 5 days ago, the day Harold walked into May's diner. Walked to the highway today, got a ride to a diner in town, asked 7 people if I could sit with them. They all said no. Then I asked the last man in the room. He was wearing a motorcycle vest. He pulled out the chair. He bought me breakfast. I gave him the key. I think he believed me. I think, for the first time in 2 years, someone actually heard me. Below that, one more line. If this is the last thing I write, I want it known. I was not confused. I was not lost. I was not incompetent. I was a prisoner. And the only person who treated me like a human being was a stranger in a diner who had every reason to say no and didn't. Cole closed the notebook. He put it back in his vest pocket, and he waited for Friday. The morning came slow. Cole was awake by 4, couldn't sleep, didn't try. He sat on the edge of his bed with his boots already on and his phone on the nightstand and the notebook in his vest. At 8, Dex called. Today? Today. You going? Can't. Lena said stay away. That's smart. I know it's smart. Doesn't make it easy. Nothing about this has been easy. At 9:30, Cole drove to the shop, opened the bay doors, turned on the radio, pretended to work. At 10:04, his phone rang. Lena. They're at the house. What's happening? Ryan answered the door. He's cooperating, being very polite, showing them around. The shed? They're getting to it. The deputies have the warrant. Ryan can't stop them. Cole held the phone with both hands. Cole, I'll call you back. The line went dead. 14 minutes. That's how long he waited. 14 minutes that felt like 14 hours. He tried to tighten a bolt on a bike frame and cross-threaded it, threw the wrench across the shop. It hit the far wall and clattered to the floor. The phone rang. They found him. Harold? He's alive. He was in the shed. The door was locked. Ryan must have repadlocked it this morning before work. The deputies cut the lock. Is he okay? Lena paused. Physically, he's dehydrated and underweight. They're transporting him to Flagstaff Medical Center for evaluation. But Cole, he was holding something when they found him. What? A butter knife. The one he'd been using on the latch. He was sitting on the cot, holding that butter knife, and when the deputies came through the door, the first thing he said was, her voice broke. Lena Castillo, 14 years in the prosecutor's office, a woman who'd trained herself to process horror like data. Her voice broke. He said, is it Friday? Cole put his hand over his eyes. The deputies photographed everything. The shed, the lock, the bucket, the sealed window, the cans, the words on the wall, all of it, officially documented, legally obtained, admissible. And Ryan? Ryan panicked. When the deputies walked toward the backyard, he tried to explain. Said the shed was for storage. Said Harold liked to sit out there. One of the deputies asked why there was a padlock on the outside of the door. Ryan said it was to keep animals out. Animals? His exact word. The deputy asked him why there was a cot and a bucket inside a storage shed. Ryan changed his story, said Harold sometimes napped out there by choice. The deputy asked why the window was sealed with plywood. Ryan stopped talking. Did they arrest him? Not yet, but the county attorney is filing charges today. Ryan was told not to leave town. His computer has been seized. His phone has been seized. The bank has been notified to freeze Harold's accounts. Cole sat down, not on a chair, on the floor of his shop, with his back against a tool cabinet and his boots stretched out in front of him. He sat there with the phone pressed against his ear and his eyes closed, and he breathed. One more thing, Lena said. When they were loading Harold into the ambulance, he asked the paramedic a question. What question? He asked, Can you tell the man at the diner that I'm still here? Cole pressed his palm against his chest, hard, like he was trying to hold something inside from breaking loose. Tell him I know, Cole said. I will. The line went quiet. Cole sat on the floor of his shop with grease on his hands and a notebook in his pocket and a brass key that had already done its job, and he let the silence hold him for as long as it needed to. Because the hard part wasn't over. The hard part was just beginning. The charges came down on a Monday. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, unlawful confinement, fraud. 4 counts, each one carrying enough weight to bury a man for years. Ryan James Caldwell was arrested at his office at Flagstaff Realty Solutions at 11:15 in the morning, in front of his coworkers, in front of his manager, in front of the receptionist who'd always thought he was such a nice young man. He didn't resist. That was the thing people talked about afterward. He didn't fight, didn't run, didn't raise his voice. He put his hands behind his back and let the deputies cuff him with the same calm, polite expression he wore to Little League games and church potlucks and every other performance he'd given for 2 years. The booking photo hit the local news that evening, clean-shaven, brown hair neatly parted, a face that looked like it belonged on a real estate brochure, not a mugshot. And that was exactly the problem. Because when people saw that face, saw those calm eyes and that even jaw, they couldn't reconcile it with what the charges described. A man who locked his 72-year-old grandfather in a shed. A man who starved him. A man who stole his money and faked his medical records and told the whole town that Grandpa was losing his mind. That face didn't match, and Ryan knew it wouldn't. He posted bail by Tuesday afternoon, $50,000. His attorney, a man named Garrison Wells, mid-50s, silver temples, 3-piece suits, the kind of lawyer who advertised on highway billboards, held a press conference outside the courthouse. My client is a devoted grandson who has spent 2 years sacrificing his personal life to care for an elderly family member suffering from progressive cognitive decline. These charges are the result of a reckless investigation driven by unverified claims and tainted by the involvement of known criminal elements. We will fight this vigorously, and when the truth comes out, Ryan Caldwell will be vindicated. Known criminal elements. Cole watched the press conference on his phone in the back of his shop. He knew that line was aimed at him. Not by name, not yet, but the implication was clear. Wells was already building the counter-narrative. A confused old man, a biker with a record, a story that didn't hold up when you looked past the emotion and examined the facts. Except the facts were exactly what was going to destroy Ryan Caldwell. Cole called Lena. I saw the press conference. I know, don't react. The lawyer's pointing at me without saying my name. Let him point. He's got nothing. Your name isn't on the warrant. You didn't enter the property with law enforcement. You're not a witness in the case file. As far as the court is concerned, you don't exist. For how long? For as long as we keep it that way. The county attorney built this case on Harold's notebook, the financial records, and the physical evidence the deputies documented. Your involvement was the catalyst, but it's not the foundation. Wells can scream about bikers all he wants. The judge isn't going to throw out bank statements because a motorcycle club member brought them to a paralegal. And the photos I took, the ones from inside the shed, they're not in evidence. We never submitted them. The deputies took their own photographs under the authority of the warrant. Those are the photos the prosecution is using. Yours don't exist. Cole breathed. Smart. That's why you came to me and not the sheriff. But Ryan wasn't done. Within 48 hours of posting bail, he started his campaign. Not a legal campaign, a social one. He understood something that most people in his position didn't. The courtroom was only half the battle. The other half was the court of public opinion, and Ryan Caldwell had been working that court for 2 years. He posted on Facebook that night, a long, carefully written statement. No anger, no defensiveness, just sorrow. Deep, wounded sorrow. He wrote about how much he loved his grandfather, how he'd given up his apartment in Phoenix and moved to Flagstaff to be closer, how he'd watched Harold decline month by month and how it broke his heart every single day. He wrote about the toll caregiving takes, the sleepless nights, the isolation, the feeling that no matter what you do, it's never enough. He never mentioned the shed, never mentioned the lock, never mentioned the bank accounts or the insurance policy. He ended with, "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but everything I've done has been out of love for the only family I have left. I ask anyone who knows me to look at my actions, all of them, before passing judgment." 723 likes by morning, 214 comments. A GoFundMe link shared by a friend raised $4,000 for his legal defense in the first 12 hours. Cole read every comment. "Ryan is the kindest person I know. This is a witch hunt. That old man doesn't know what day it is. My mom saw him wandering the neighborhood confused last year. Who's behind this? Someone said bikers are involved. That tells you everything. Praying for you, Ryan. God knows the truth." Cole closed the app, set his phone face down on the workbench, pressed both palms against the metal surface until the cold bit into his skin. He wanted to respond, wanted to post the photos, wanted to put Harold's notebook online and let every one of those 723 people read what their kind, devoted Ryan had done. But he didn't, because Lena was right. The courtroom was where this ended, not the internet. Harold, meanwhile, was at Flagstaff Medical Center, room 214, under observation. The admitting physician documented dehydration, malnutrition, untreated arthritis in his left knee, the source of the limp, and bruising consistent with repeated physical restraint. His cognitive evaluation came back clean, not borderline, not ambiguous, clean. The neurologist who administered the test said Harold scored in the 92nd percentile for his age group. 92nd percentile. A man Ryan Caldwell had convinced the world was losing his mind scored higher on cognitive tests than most people 20 years younger. The neurologist's report went straight to the county attorney. Lena called Cole with the results. "His mind is perfect." The neurologist used the word remarkable, said Harold's recall, his reasoning, his verbal fluency, all of it is intact. Whatever Dr. Prescott diagnosed, it doesn't match reality. What's happening with Prescott? The medical board opened an inquiry 2 days ago. They pulled her records for all 5 patients she assessed. The state attorney general's office has a forensic accountant looking at Ryan's finances to see if there are connections to the other families. You think he's done this before? I think someone has. Whether it's Ryan alone or Ryan and Prescott together, the pattern is there. 5 elderly patients, all diagnosed with cognitive decline by the same doctor, all with family members who took over their finances within months of the diagnosis. 1 dead, the other 3 still alive, but their bank accounts tell the same story Harold's does. Cole felt the floor shift under him. Not physically, but the way it shifts when you realize the thing you're looking at is bigger than the thing you thought you were looking at. This isn't just a grandson stealing from his grandfather. No, it might not be. How long before they know? Weeks, maybe months. The forensic work takes time, but Harold's case goes to trial regardless. The county attorney isn't waiting. Trial was set for 6 weeks out. Ryan's attorney filed motion after motion. Suppress the notebook, denied. Suppress the financial records, denied. Dismiss on grounds of improper investigation, denied. Each motion landed with a thud and went nowhere. But Wells kept filing them because every motion bought time and every delay gave Ryan another week to work the public. And Ryan used every week. He showed up at a community fundraiser 3 weeks before trial, shook hands, smiled, wore a polo shirt and khakis, and looked like every good neighbor anyone had ever trusted. Someone took a photo of him helping set up folding chairs. It circulated online with the caption, "This is the man they arrested. Does this look like a criminal to you?" Cole saw the photo, showed it to Dex. Dex stared at it. A man setting up chairs. That's the whole game. He shows up looking normal, and people can't believe normal people do monstrous things. They need the monster to look like a monster. When he doesn't, they decide the accusation must be wrong. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. A week before trial, something happened that nobody expected. Dr. Elaine Prescott called the county attorney's office. Not through her lawyer, not through a representative. She called directly, asked for the prosecutor handling the Caldwell case, and said 4 words that blew the investigation wide open. "I want to cooperate." Lena called Cole that night. Her voice was different, not excited. Lena didn't do excited, but there was an energy underneath her words that Cole had never heard. Prescott's flipping. On who? On all of it. She's retained her own counsel, separate from Ryan. She's negotiating a cooperation agreement in exchange for reduced charges. And Cole, what she's telling them changes everything. How? Ryan didn't find Prescott. Prescott found Ryan. She's been running this scheme for over 4 years. She identifies elderly patients through community health screenings, free events at churches, senior centers, VFW halls. She targets patients who live alone or with a single family member. She builds a relationship. Then she connects them with a caregiver coordinator. That's Ryan. Ryan moves in, takes over finances, isolates the patient, and Prescott provides the medical cover. The cognitive decline diagnosis, the paperwork that makes everything legal on the surface. Cole sat down. How many? 7 confirmed. Harold was number 7. The 4 we already knew about, plus 2 more in Yavapai County that the AG's office just connected. 7 people. 7 people who were systematically stripped of their autonomy, their finances, and their dignity by a doctor they trusted and a man who smiled at them. Cole thought about the 412 likes on Ryan's post about sacrifice. He thought about the GoFundMe, the folding chairs, the Christmas cookies. What about the one who died? Cole asked. The patient from 11 months ago? Lena went quiet. When she spoke, her voice had dropped. His name was Walter Briggs, 81 years old, died of hypothermia. The death certificate said natural causes, exposure during a period of confusion. He was found outside his home in January. Temperature that night was 26 degrees. Was the door locked? From the outside. Cole's hand curled into a fist. Not a threat, not anger. Something past anger, something that lived in the marrow. His insurance paid out 2 weeks after the funeral. Beneficiary had been changed 9 months prior. To who? A nephew. A nephew who was connected to Ryan through Prescott's network. So they killed him. The AG's office is investigating it as a potential homicide. Prescott isn't directly implicating herself in Walter's death, but she's providing documentation that shows the nephew was operating under the same playbook as Ryan. Same financial takeover, same isolation, same diagnosis. Cole pressed his fist against his forehead. Harold would have been next. Yes, if you hadn't been sitting in that diner, Harold Bennett would have been Walter Briggs. Maybe not this month, maybe not this year, but eventually. The insurance was already changed. The medical records were already filed. The only variable was time. Cole hung up. He sat in the dark of his shop for a long time. The fluorescent lights were off. The bay doors were closed. Just him and the smell of motor oil and the hum of the Flagstaff night outside. He pulled out the notebook, opened it to the first page. If anything happens to me, this is why. Harold had known. Not the full scope, not Prescott, not the network, not Walter Briggs, but he'd known the essential truth, that someone was trying to make him disappear. Not in a dramatic way, not with violence or spectacle, in a quiet way, a bureaucratic way, a way that involved paperwork and smiles and locked doors, and the slow, deliberate erasure of a person's existence, until one day they simply weren't there anymore, and everyone shrugged and said, well, he was getting old. That was the real horror. Not the shed, not the padlock, not the cold. The horror was that it almost worked. The horror was that it had worked before. The horror was that somewhere out there, right now, in some other quiet town, some other Ryan was pouring coffee for some other neighbor and smiling and saying, Grandpa's doing fine, just tired today," while the lock clicked shut one more time. Trial started on a Wednesday. The courtroom was full. Local media, 2 Phoenix stations, a reporter from the Tucson paper who'd gotten a tip about the Prescott angle. And in the third row, sitting where she'd sat every Sunday for 20 years, next to a woman named June, Harold Bennett took his seat. He'd gained weight in the 6 weeks since his rescue. His limp was better. The arthritis medication they'd finally prescribed was doing its job. He wore a blue button-down shirt, tucked in properly, buttoned correctly. His hair was trimmed. His hands were steady. He didn't look at Ryan. Ryan sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, hair combed, posture straight. Garrison Wells sat next to him, legal pad already full of notes, silver pen catching the light every time he wrote. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 22 minutes. It was delivered by a woman named Carla Medina, assistant county attorney, 12 years of trial experience, and a voice that never rose above conversational volume but carried the weight of a sledgehammer. She walked the jury through everything: the diner, the notebook, the bank statements, the insurance change, the shed, the lock, the sealed window, the cot and the bucket and the 4 cans of soup. She showed photographs, the deputy's photographs, legally obtained, properly documented. She displayed the medical records from Prescott and then the neurological evaluation that contradicted them completely. And then she said something that silenced the room. The defendant didn't just steal from Harold Bennett. He didn't just confine him. He stole something no bank statement can measure. He stole Harold Bennett's credibility. He made it so that when Harold tried to tell the truth, nobody believed him. He weaponized an old man's age against him. He turned Harold's dignity into a punchline. And he did it with a smile. Ryan didn't blink. Wells's opening was exactly what Cole expected. Caregiver burnout, stress, misunderstandings, a grandfather whose memory wasn't as reliable as the prosecution claimed. He leaned into the humanity angle, talked about Ryan's sacrifices, his devotion, the burden of watching a loved one decline. "My client isn't a monster," Wells said. "He's a 34-year-old man who gave up everything to take care of the only family he had left." Did he make mistakes? Yes. Were those mistakes criminal? Absolutely not. Harold sat in the third row and listened to a man in a $3,000 suit explain to 12 strangers that none of it had happened. His hands were in his lap. His thumbs were pressed together, but his eyes were steady. The prosecution called its witnesses: the bank teller who remembered, the postal worker who noticed, the pastor who regretted, the neurologist who tested, each one adding a brick to a wall Ryan's attorney couldn't climb over. Then Prescott took the stand. The courtroom shifted. Everyone knew what was coming, but hearing it from the doctor's mouth, from the woman who'd signed the papers, who'd provided the medical cover, who'd made the whole machine run, that was different. Prescott testified for 3 hours. She described the system, how she identified targets, how she connected them with handlers, how the diagnoses were fabricated, how the financial takeover worked, how the isolation was maintained. She named names, dates, amounts, and then the prosecutor asked a question that stopped everything. "Dr. Prescott, in your professional and personal assessment, was Harold Bennett ever cognitively impaired?" Prescott looked at Harold, for the first time, directly at him. "No," she said. "Harold Bennett was one of the sharpest patients I ever examined. I knew he was competent. I falsified the records anyway." Harold didn't move, didn't react, just sat there with his thumbs pressed together and let the truth fill the room. Ryan's composure cracked for the first time. Not a big crack, not a dramatic break. His right hand moved to his left wrist and squeezed. His jaw shifted. His eyes darted to Wells, who was already writing furiously. But the crack was there, and once a mask cracks, it doesn't heal. Wells cross-examined Prescott for an hour, tried to discredit her, tried to paint her as a liar cutting a deal, tried to suggest she was framing Ryan to save herself. Prescott didn't waver. "I'm not framing anyone. I'm telling you what we did, what I did. and what Ryan Caldwell did to a man who trusted him with his life. The jury watched. 12 faces, 12 sets of eyes moving between the doctor on the stand and the man at the defense table. Ryan sat perfectly still, but the smile was gone. The thing he'd built, the persona, the reputation, the architecture of decency, was coming apart in real time, brick by brick, word by word, under oath and on the record. And in the third row, Harold Bennett sat with his hands in his lap and waited for the one thing he'd been waiting for since the first lock went on the door. Not revenge, not anger, just someone finally saying out loud what he'd been scratching into the wall of a shed for 2 years. The truth. The guilty verdict came on a Thursday morning. Quiet, no gasps, no outbursts, just the foreman standing, unfolding a single piece of paper, and reading the words that 12 people had agreed on after less than 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Elder abuse, guilty. Financial exploitation, guilty. Unlawful confinement, guilty. Fraud, guilty. Ryan Caldwell sat at the defense table and didn't move. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him. His eyes were fixed on a point somewhere past the judge, past the jury, past the room itself, focused on nothing. The way a man's eyes go when the future he built collapses, and there's nothing left to look at. Garrison Wells put a hand on Ryan's shoulder. Ryan didn't acknowledge it. The courtroom was still, not the stillness of shock, the stillness of something finally settling into place. Like a door closing after being open too long. Like the last note of a song nobody wanted to hear fading into silence. Harold sat in the third row. Same seat, same blue shirt, same steady hands. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He didn't stand up or make a sound. He nodded. Once. Small. Almost imperceptible. The nod of a man who'd been telling the truth for 2 years and had finally, after everything, been believed. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks out. Ryan was remanded into custody, bail revoked given the severity of the charges and the ongoing investigation into the wider network. 2 deputies approached the defense table. Ryan stood on his own, put his hands behind his back without being asked. Still calm, still polite, still performing, even now, because the performance was all he had left, and a man like Ryan Caldwell didn't know how to exist without it. As the deputies led him past the gallery, he looked at Harold. For the first time since the trial began, grandfather and grandson made eye contact. Ryan's mouth opened, like he was going to say something, an apology, an excuse, a final attempt at the story he'd been telling for 2 years. Harold looked back at him with eyes that held no hatred, no rage, no satisfaction, just clarity, the clearest thing in the room. Ryan closed his mouth. The deputies walked him through the side door. It shut behind him with a sound that carried more finality than any verdict. The courtroom emptied slowly. People stood, gathered their things, filed out in small clusters. The prosecutor shook hands with the victim's advocate. A reporter cornered Wells in the hallway. The jury was escorted out through a separate exit. Harold stayed in his seat. The room cleared around him. The bailiff looked over once, then looked away. A janitor started collecting water cups from the jury box. Harold sat there with his hands in his lap, his thumbs pressed together. Not from fear this time, from something else. Something he hadn't felt in so long, he'd almost forgotten what it was. Relief. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that comes with tears or laughter or falling to your knees. The quiet kind. The kind that starts in the chest and moves outward, loosening things you didn't know were tight. Muscles you'd been clenching for years. Thoughts you'd been holding behind a wall. He breathed in, held it, let it go. Then he stood up, slowly. The limp was still there. It would always be there, but it was different now, lighter. Not because the arthritis had healed, but because the weight he'd been carrying on top of it was gone. He walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway. Lena was there. She'd been sitting on a bench outside the door, phone in hand, already fielding calls from the AG's office about the next steps in the Prescott investigation. She stood when she saw Harold. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Harold thought about it. "Like a man who just remembered he owns his own life." Lena smiled. A real one. The first one Cole's people had ever seen from her. "There's going to be a sentencing hearing. 3 weeks. You don't have to attend. I'll be there. There's also going to be a civil case. The county attorney is pursuing restitution, full recovery of all stolen funds, plus damages. It'll take time, but the financial records are airtight." Harold nodded. "The house? Ryan's name was never on the deed. It's yours. Always was. The county is arranging for the shed to be removed. Permanently." Something moved across Harold's face. Not pain, not grief. The particular exhaustion of a man who'd survived something that should have destroyed him and was only now allowing himself to feel how close it came. "The shed," he repeated. "Gone. By the end of the month." Harold put his hand against the wall, steadied himself. Not because his leg gave out, because the relief hit a layer he hadn't been prepared for. The shed was where he'd slept for months, where he'd eaten half cans of soup, where he'd scratched 4 words into the drywall with a nail he'd pulled from the floorboard, where he'd sat on a thin cot and held a butter knife and waited for Friday. Gone. By the end of the month. He straightened, took his hand off the wall. "Thank you, Lena." "Don't thank me. Thank the man who brought me that notebook." Harold looked down the hallway. Empty, fluorescent lights humming, linoleum floor, nobody there. "Where is he?" Harold asked. "He couldn't be here. For the case. His involvement had to stay invisible." "I know. I understand why. But I need to see him." "I'll make sure that happens." 3 days later, Harold drove himself to May's Diner. Drove himself. In his own car. With his own keys. On his own road. The license had been reinstated after the cognitive evaluation proved what Harold had known all along. That his mind was fine, had always been fine, and that the only confusion in his life had been manufactured by someone else. He parked in the same lot, walked through the same glass door, heard the same bell jingle overhead. The lunch crowd was thin, a couple of truckers, a family with kids. The waitress, same girl, blonde ponytail, looked up from the counter and recognized him. Her face changed. Not pity, something warmer, something closer to respect. "Welcome back," she said. Harold nodded. He looked toward the back corner. The table tucked against the wall where the overhead light still hadn't been replaced. Cole was already there. He was sitting in the same chair. Same worn leather vest. Same dark blonde hair pulled back. Same eyes that missed nothing. And across from him, the second chair was already pulled out. Harold walked to the table. Each step steady. The limp present but manageable. His hands at his sides, not trembling. He sat down. Cole looked at him. Harold looked at Cole. Neither spoke for a long moment, not because there was nothing to say, because the things that needed saying didn't fit easily into words. They lived in the space between 2 men sitting across from each other in a roadside diner. One who'd asked a question nobody wanted to hear, and one who'd answered it with a chair. "You look better," Cole said. "I eat 3 meals a day now." "Good. And I sleep in a bed." "Good." Harold picked up the menu, held it steady, read it without his fingers shaking. "I'm having more than toast this time," he said. Cole's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, something close. The waitress came over. Harold ordered a full breakfast. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, coffee, orange juice. He ordered it the way a man orders when he knows nobody's going to take the plate away. When the meal belongs to him. When the table belongs to him. When the morning belongs to him. Cole ordered black coffee, same as before. The food came. Harold ate. Not small, careful bites this time. Real bites. Hungry bites. He buttered his pancakes. He put too much syrup on them. He ate the bacon with his fingers and didn't apologize for it. Cole watched him eat the way he'd watched him the first time. Quiet, steady, present. When Harold finished, he set his fork down and pushed the plate aside. "Ryan got 22 years, Harold said. Cole nodded. He'd heard. Lena had called. The judge gave him the maximum on every count, said it was one of the most calculated cases of elder abuse she'd ever seen. Ryan didn't say anything, just stood there, didn't even look at me. Cole sipped his coffee. Prescott got 7 years, reduced for cooperation. She testified against 2 other people in the network. The AG's office has 5 open cases now, 5 families. I heard, Harold leaned forward. Did you hear about Walter Briggs? Cole's jaw tightened. Yeah, they reclassified his death. It's a homicide investigation now. The nephew's been arrested. Prescott testified that the plan was the same as mine. Isolation, financial takeover, fabricated diagnosis. Except Walter didn't have a storage unit. He didn't have a notebook. He didn't walk into a diner and find someone willing to listen. Harold's voice cracked. Not from weakness, from the weight of what he was saying. Walter died because nobody pulled out a chair. The words sat between them. Cole set his mug down. You can't carry that, Cole said. I'm not carrying it, I'm saying it, because people need to hear it. Walter Briggs died alone in 26-degree weather because every person around him believed the lie. Every single one. And if I hadn't gotten that latch open with a butter knife, if I hadn't walked 1.5 miles on a bad knee, if you hadn't been sitting at this table, I'd be Walter. But you're not. No, I'm not, because of you. Cole shook his head. No, because of you. You kept that notebook. You rented that storage unit. You scratched your name into a wall. You didn't give up. I just happened to be here. You didn't just happen to be here. 7 people said no. You said yes. That was a choice. Cole was quiet for a long time. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table. Once, twice. Can I ask you something? Harold said. Go ahead. Why? Why did you pull out that chair? You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. A man in your position, you could have said no like everyone else. Nobody would have blamed you. Cole stopped turning the mug. He looked at Harold the way he'd looked at him that first day. Direct, unflinching. Because you asked. Harold waited, expecting more. That's it? He said. That's it. You asked. You needed somewhere to sit. I had a chair. That's not complicated, Harold. That's just what you do. Harold stared at him. And then something happened that hadn't happened in 2 years. He laughed. A real laugh. Not bitter, not broken. Full and rough and startled out of him like a bird flushed from tall grass. He laughed and his eyes watered, and he wiped them with the back of his hand, and he shook his head. You're something else, Cole Mercer. I've been told. They sat there for another hour, talked about nothing important, talked about the weather and the Diamondbacks, and whether the coffee at Mays had always been this burnt, or if it was getting worse. They talked the way 2 men talk when the hard things have already been said, and what's left is just the living. When Harold stood to leave, he reached for his wallet. Don't, Cole said. You bought me breakfast last time. I'm buying today. Harold, let me do this. Cole looked at him, at the steady hands, the clear eyes. The man who'd walked into this diner 6 weeks ago with bruises on his wrists and fear in his bones, asking strangers for a seat. All right, Cole said. Harold paid at the counter, left a 30% tip. The waitress thanked him by name. He walked back to Cole's table, stopped. Same time next week? Harold asked. Cole leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and for the first time since Harold Bennett had known him, Cole Mercer smiled. Chair'll be out. Harold nodded, turned, walked to the door with his limp in his steady hands and his clear, unbroken mind. The bell jingled as he pushed through, and for the first time, he didn't check behind him. Cole sat alone at the table. He finished his coffee. He looked at the chair across from him, the one he'd pulled out for a stranger on an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary diner because an old man with a limp asked a question nobody else wanted to answer. He thought about all the ways it could have gone, the 7 tables that said no, the locked shed, the butter knife, the notebook filled with dates and amounts, and the careful, furious handwriting of a man who refused to disappear. He thought about Walter Briggs dead in 26-degree weather because nobody looked twice. He thought about how thin the line is, how one word, sit, can split the difference between a man surviving and a man vanishing. How the smallest gesture, the most ordinary act of decency, can crack open something enormous and terrible and necessary. He left a 20 on the table, stood up, walked out into the afternoon heat. His bike was parked at the curb. He threw a leg over, kicked the engine, felt it rumble through his chest the way it always did, steady, alive, unquestioning. He pulled onto the highway. Behind him, the diner got smaller. Ahead of him, the road stretched open and wide. And somewhere in a house in Mountain Air, Harold Bennett unlocked his own front door with his own key, walked into his own kitchen, and sat down at his own table for the first time in 2 years. No lock on the door, no fear in his chest, no question about who he was or where he belonged. Because the difference between someone disappearing quietly and someone surviving was never about strength. It was never about power. It was never about the law or the system or the people who were supposed to protect you and didn't. It was about one moment, one question, one stranger deciding not to look away. Can I sit with you? And someone choosing to say yes.